Alright, so today's movie review is Un Chien Andalou, or The Andalusian Dog, from Louis Buñuel from 1929, and also from Salvador Dali, and that's today's movie review. Let me read the critic list description. Un Chien Andalou is a European avant-garde surrealist film, and it's a collaboration between Louis Buñuel and Salvador Dali, a famous surrealist artist. So, before I get into the review, if you're not familiar with Salvador Dali, he did the famous painting of the clocks in the desert that are kind of like hanging over and weird looking. He was a surrealist painter. Louis Buñuel, he did a lot of films too, I believe. I don't think I've seen any of his other ones, though. This is probably the first one I've seen in his filmography. But let me get into my thoughts on the plot. So the plot, I gave it a 3 out of 5. Now, here's the thing about this film. There isn't really one. It's just a series of shocking events that kind of invoked a sort of emotion within you. So they're kind of random, shocking imagery. There's a lot of theories about what the story is, but Buñuel said, I'll quote him directly here, "Do not dwell on what required purely rational, psychological, or cultural explanations. Open the way to the irrational. It was accepted only that which struck us regardless of the meaning." So basically, I kind of agree with him there. Don't try to make sense of what the story is. Talk about what shocking imagery you saw and then draw your own conclusions with it. That's the interesting thing about art, especially surrealist art. Sometimes there isn't really a message. That the message is make one, make your own meaning with it. But with that, this was my second time watching it. I wanted to give it another chance because it had been about 7 years since I last saw it. I actually liked it more this time around, but I'll be honest, I like having a bit of a plot. I don't know what I expected to be different this time around, but I really wanted to give it another chance. The non-plot aspect of it is a bit jarring, kind of hard to follow, but it isn't the reason to watch the film, if that makes sense. So I'll get into that more here, but that's why I gave the plot a 3 out of 5. Alright, the acting. I actually really like the acting, 4 out of 5. There isn't really a story, right? But the way that they're interacting with these crazy moments, like, bugs coming out of his hands, or like this scene here, he takes his mouth away, or the pianos that are attached to him with donkey carcasses, and then 2 guys attached to it. A lot of really interesting reactions from the cast. And surprisingly, it felt surprisingly modern considering how it's from 1929. So I was impressed with that. That's what I noticed this time around, that the acting is actually really good considering how there isn't a plot to follow. So 4 out of 5. All right, the set design. So I mentioned those donkeys there. As far as I know, these aren't real donkeys, or if they are, they're just like taxidermy. So don't get it shut down here, YouTube. But I thought the set design, as bizarre and surrealist as it was incredible, man. 5 out of 5. Again, I mentioned the piano scene, outdoor shots, the scenes on the beach. All of it just looked and felt claustrophobic, but then also wide. And it was very interesting, very dreamlike, as other people have pointed out. I was very impressed with that. 5 out of 5. Very creative for sure. Dali and Louis Buñuel, they did really well with the design here. All right, cinematography. I was mentioning the hand with the ant scene. That was really interesting. And then the classic scene overall, of course, is the knife being drawn across the face to cut the eyeball, and with it being intercut with a scene of cloud going across the moon. And then there's actually an eye being cut. Now, supposedly it's a cow eyeball. Oh, it gets me every time. It's the one scene in the movie that makes me really queasy, man. I hate that moment. There's also some other ones that I'll mention in the critic list description too that are very shocking and disturbing too. But that one for sure, there's a reason why it's the cover photo for every release of the movie, or if you find it on YouTube, they use that photo because it's just such a shocking imagery. Comes out of nowhere too. Hey, I guess that's surreal art, right? But that's why I gave it a 5 out of 5 for cinematography. All right, music. So I found a random version of it on YouTube because it's in the public domain and it's only 20 minutes long, so it's very easy to make your own version of it. I don't think the version I saw was the original score. That's why I gave it a 3.5 out of 5, because I don't think it'd be fair to give it a high score if it wasn't the one most people heard. So that's why I gave it 3.5 out of 5. Okay, so overall, that brings my score to a 4.1 out of 5, which I'm rounding to a 4 out of 5, and that's an 82% on Criticlist. So now let me break down the Criticlist score here. Graphic language, none. And there's barely any quote-unquote dialogue altogether. There's like 2 or 3 title cards, if that. There's hardly anything at all. Violence. So the close-up of the eye being cut, the dead donkeys on the piano, the ants coming out of a hand, and a severed hand. It's all very quick, but very disturbing. Kind of blink and you'll miss it kind of deal. But still very disturbing and does stick with you for sure. Nudity, sexual content. So this is what I was mentioning earlier for disturbing scenes. There's some very brief but shocking nudity. Nothing explicit is shown or anything like that. But it's definitely a lot more than you'd expect from a silent film. But it's very, very disturbing because there's, implications of rape and whatnot. So, yeah, pretty disturbing stuff. So, definitely, when I get to family friendly, it's definitely not family friendly. All right, political bias, none. Although I would consider surrealist art to be a little more, I would say a little bit more left leaning. But honestly, Dali and whatnot, they definitely were more involved politically later on. I don't think at this point they were. But this definitely is, I would say, more avant-garde, which I find to be a bit more of a left-leaning, more postmodernist kind of art style. I consider that to be left-leaning, for sure. All right, family-friendly? Not at all. The aforementioned violence and nudity alone is definitely not for children. Right, entertainment value, in the sense of it being weird and creepy and kind of gives you crazy feelings, like that was the intent of the film, I guess yes, if you like that. I don't always love that, but this time around, I was genuinely intrigued by it. I actually liked a lot of the technical aspect of it. I was very impressed with it this time around. So overall, would I recommend this movie? I would say if you're a fan of film in general, and if you like video editing, yes. But if you're just an average moviegoer, this is a bit too surrealist, I think, for most people. And I hated it when I first saw it. I believe it was in a film class in college that I saw it. I hated it. I liked it more this time around, and I'm surprised how much I did. But this is definitely not one I will watch all the time, or really anytime soon. I'll probably wait 10 years or more. And it's definitely not a film for everybody. Definitely, if you're a fan, though, of like a David Lynch or kind of more macabre, more horror kind of stuff, I think you'll like it. This is definitely not a average moviegoer type of film. All right, well, those are my thoughts on Un Chien Andalou, or The Andalusian Dog, from 1929. And that concludes today's movie review.